This 2008 Porsche 911 GT2 is the fastest and most capable 997 generation Porsche that I have ever driven. This is the third time I've driven this car on camera now, and there's a very specific reason. After driving this car back-to-back with a 997.1 GT3 as well as a 991.2 GT3 Touring, this relatively old 2008 GT2 is still the most ridiculously fast 997 I've ever experienced in a straight line. And it's not just about the straight line performance. It stops on a dime with its carbon ceramic brakes. It's got amazing traction out of corners despite the 530 horsepower and almost 500 foot-pounds of torque. It has steering feel for days. It has grip for days. It is just one of the best cars I've ever driven, hands down. So there's a very specific reason I'm driving it again today. I want to know whether a modified 997 GT3 with a naturally aspirated engine can feel as devastatingly quick as this old 997 GT2. But we'll get to that in a second. First of all, let's take this thing for another drive and remind ourselves why it's one of my top 5 cars that I've ever driven. And there's your answer. The way those twin turbos kick in above 3,000 RPM, it catches me off guard almost every time. This car is so fast for a 2008. And even though there's a lot of turbo lag down low, if you keep the engine above 3,000, it actually has pretty linear response. 530 horsepower might not seem crazy by today's standards, but it's a combination of the relatively low weight of the car and the fact that the power just builds so dramatically when you squeeze that throttle. And it hooks up so well coming out of corners. I have traction and stability control both turned off right now. Well, look at the way this thing just goes. The limits are so high. Steering feel for days, always accurately place the front end. We're on a Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tire. There's plenty of grip. Just look at this mid-corner grip here. It's unreal. This is so good. So good. I'm blown away every time I drive this car. And the brakes just, they match the power level of the car perfectly. Immediate bite when you get into that pedal, but the harder you push, the harder the car stops. It's very progressive. The only mod on this car is a lightweight flywheel, and the suspension programming is aftermarket. I can honestly say that suspension on this car feels better than the stock suspension I tried in a 997.1 GT3. It's not only more compliant, it's also more confidence inspiring when you're driving on a bumpy road, and in the corners, it just provides so much feedback. It never gets old, never gets old. Still can't believe this car is 14 years old now. This thing will exceed 200 miles an hour if you really get to stretch its legs. I've said it before, but the only downside to this car, for me personally, is that the turbochargers really do mask that beautiful flat 6 howl. This 3.6 liter flat 6 really sings in the GT3 when you allow it to breathe atmospherically, but strap those turbos on and you get more whooshing sounds versus that high-pitched induction note. So again, one of the best cars I've ever driven, but let's find out if Walter's 997.2 GT3 with a bunch of mods can feel just brutally as fast and capable as this nearly stock GT2. Welcome to a 2010 Porsche 911 GT3 from the 997.2 generation. The .2 has an enlarged 3.8 liter version of the Metzger motor that makes 435 horsepower, which is about 20 horsepower more in the old 3.6 liter. There are some other changes here and there to the suspension, the chassis, the overall look of the car, and the aero, but I would say overall it was an incremental change, not a drastically different driving experience. However, this car is far from stock, so let me go through this list of mods for you. A custom engine build by Autometrics Motorsports on the East Coast. The original 3.8 liter was bored and stroked out to 4.2 liters. An RSR crankshaft from the actual 997 RSR race car. Molle pistons, Carilla rods, RS 4.0 intake manifold, Dundon carbon fiber airbox, RS 4.0 clutch, single mass flywheel, and BBI custom dyno tuning. So with all of those engine mods, this thing is now pushing over 500 horsepower, which puts it right in line with the 530 horsepower of the GT2 that we just drove. Other mods on the car include the JRZ 12.32 triple adjustable coilovers, BBS RE MTSP forged monoblock wheels, wow that is a mouthful, AP Racing two-piece brake discs with the original Porsche calipers, an LSD rebuilt with Porsche Motorsport clutch discs, Euro GT3 buckets, and I gotta say they are pretty dang comfortable. Walter's overall ethos with this car is to make it perform at a much higher level, and he actually tracks this car. So he's tracked this car 4 times this year alone, but the important part is the car still needs to be street friendly. The spring rates on these JRZs pretty low, 450 pounds in the front, 700 in the rear, and I can attest that it is a pretty comfortable suspension out here in the canyons. But let's push this car a little bit, as we always do, and see how different or maybe similar it feels to the 997 GT2, which is still my gold standard for the 997 generation. We're gonna open up this sport exhaust and crack the window a bit, just so you guys can enjoy this. The gearing in these cars is so long. It really means even out here on a pretty open canyon road, I don't get to wind the engine out much except in first and second gear, which is a shame because this shifter is actually really nice to use. I want to be able to feel that mechanical click click a little more often. Oh my gosh, that sound. That sound. Woo, this is fast. This is so much faster than a stock 997.1 GT3. That is insane. Oh my goodness. Even in the mid-range, around 5 grand, it pulls so much harder than the .1. 4.2 liters versus 3.6. There's just no comparison. But the real question we're trying to answer here is how does it feel compared to the GT2? Well, I can say it is easier to drive hard, that's for sure. The naturally aspirated engine just gives you that instantaneous and predictable throttle response every single time. However, on the straights, when you get on the power, the GT2 still feels more potent. Maybe it's because of the lag, but I want to say it still makes more power up top just because when you keep the RPM above 3K in the GT2, it has just a sense of urgency to that top end that this engine just doesn't have. I mean, this pulls linearly, don't get me wrong, all the way to over 8,000 RPM, but not with the same kind of push you in the back of your seat kind of experience. This suspension is out of this world good. It feels like the car should have come with the suspension from the factory, to be honest, but it just has so much compliance over bumps. I can take everything just flat out. Brakes are good, but I feel like the carbon ceramics on the GT2 are a little better. I'm actually able to engage ABS in this car a little bit more easily with these AP Racing rotors. So much steering feel in these 997 hydraulic racks. I love it. It blows the 991 electric steering out of the water. Combined with the lightweight single mass flywheel, this engine and gearbox combo, just an absolute joy. Getting the perfect rev match downshift, it's just a cinch in this thing. Watch this. Fourth gear, third, second, no problem. I had a lot more trouble getting the GT2 downshifts to be that perfect, and that also has a single mass lightweight flywheel. And again, it comes down to that NA throttle response. It's just better. It's just better. Look at that mid-range pull from 5,000 all the way to 8.2. And we're on a Goodyear Eagle F1 Supercar 3 tire, which I think is actually pretty comparable to the Michelin Cup 2 that the GT2 is wearing. All right, let's back it off, close up that exhaust baffle, and let me try to collect my thoughts for a moment. Such an experience, such an experience. It just feels like a cohesive build. Everything meshes together so well. It doesn't feel modified, and that's the best compliment I can give a car like this, because Walter tried to make this car a streetable, higher performance version of an already very, very capable platform in the 997.2 GT3. He mentioned that his boss, several years ago, took him for a ride in his 997 GT3 RS 4.0, which you Porsche fanatics out there will know is one of the most desirable 911s of all time. And Walter was completely blown away when he rode in that car, and he said to himself, I can't afford one of these, but I want to buy a GT3 and modify it to make it feel as close as possible. And I've got to say, having not driven an RS 4.0 myself, I just can't fathom how a GT3 could feel better than this. This is my new favorite car. Better than the 991.2 GT3 Touring that I've driven. And despite that amazing GT2 still giving that like rush of straight line performance, along with all the other amazing dynamics that it has, the NA engine in this car, tuned up to 500 plus horsepower, is something to die for. Combined with the suspension and the other work that's been done to this car, these bucket seats, it is the best car I've ever driven, hands down. Thanks for watching. See you next time.